Her hands shook as she pushed the heavy door open. The rusted metal groaned. Something shifted in the dark behind it. Heavy, slow, deliberate. She stumbled back a step. Her belly was enormous, 7 months along, and she had no one with her. Just her, this empty field, and whatever was moving inside a $12 grain silo at the edge of nowhere. She grabbed the frame, steadied herself, listened. Silence. Then a sound she didn't expect. Not a threat. Not an animal. Something else entirely. The kind of sound that stops a person cold and makes them question everything they thought they knew about a moment. Her name was Dana Mercer. She was 26, alone, and broke. And the decision everyone around her had laughed at was about to rewrite her entire life. What did she find inside that silo? Nobody saw it coming. Stay with me on this one. Dana Mercer worked double shifts at a roadside diner called Rusty's, in a small town in central Ohio. Breakfast crowd, lunch crowd, then back for dinner on the days she could manage it. She wore non-slip shoes that didn't help much on the tile floor. Her feet swelled. Her lower back was a constant low complaint. She smiled anyway because tips. The baby was due in 9 weeks. The father had been gone for 6 of those months. He didn't leave a note. He just stopped being there, which is its own kind of message. She had one room in a rental on Depot Street. Small enough that her kitchen table was also her desk. Her couch was her spare chair. The landlord, a man named Gerald, had slid a notice under her door the previous month. Rent going up. $40 more, starting in 60 days. To most people, $40 is dinner out. To Dana, $40 was a calculation she ran 3 times to make sure she wasn't missing something. She wasn't missing anything. The math just didn't work. Her sister Pam lived 20 minutes away with 2 kids of her own and a husband who worked long hours. Pam helped when she could. A bag of groceries here, a 20 there. But Pam had her own walls to hold up. You can only lean on a person so much before you both fall over. Dana wasn't the type to ask twice. What she was, if you want to know, was stubborn in the quiet way. Not loud about it. Not dramatic. She just kept moving when other people would have stopped. Kept showing up when quitting would have been easier. That's not a heroic quality. It's a survival quality. She'd learned it early. Now, on a Wednesday night in late October, she was sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open and a bowl of instant noodles going cold. She was looking at the County Tax Authority auction website. She did this sometimes. Not because she had money to spend. More because it was something to look at. A kind of window shopping where the window was rusted farm equipment and condemned buildings. And then she saw it. The listing was brief. 1 steel grain silo, approximately 40 feet tall, located on a 0.4-acre parcel, rural Route 9, Hardin County. Property sold as is. Taxes delinquent. Minimum opening bid, $12. $12. She read it 3 times. The photo attached to the listing showed a silo that had seen better decades. Rust patches on the lower half. A door that sat slightly off its frame. Tall grass around the base. A field visible behind it, flat and empty. She clicked through the auction details. The bidding window was closing in 4 hours. She told herself she was just looking. She clicked over to her bank account. She had $417 and some cents. That was before rent, before the next electric bill, before anything. She looked at the listing again. $12. Now here's the thing. Dana couldn't have told you exactly why she did what she did next. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have a vision. She just had a feeling. And feelings were about all she could afford at that point. She placed the bid. $12. She was the only bidder. At 11:42 that night, a confirmation email arrived. Congratulations. You are the winning bidder. She stared at it for a long time. Then she called Pam. Pam laughed. Not a small laugh. A real one. Dana, you bought a silo. I bought a silo. What are you going to do with a silo? I don't know yet. More laughter. The next day at Rusty's, one of the other waitresses asked how she was doing, and Dana mentioned it, and that went around the diner in about 15 minutes. The cook, a big man named Dale, leaned out the service window and said, "You gonna have that baby in a grain silo?" General hilarity. Dana smiled and kept moving. She didn't explain herself. She printed out the confirmation email and folded it up and put it in her apron pocket. She kept it there all day. 3 days after the auction closed, on a Saturday morning, she drove out to Route 9 to see what she'd bought. The field was flat and brown. The sky was that hard, cold blue you get in Ohio in late October. The silo stood at the edge of the property line. Up close, it was taller than she'd expected. Maybe 35 feet. Not huge, but real. Solid. She walked up to it, put her hand on the metal. It was cold. Smooth in some places, rough with rust in others. The door was padlocked, but the padlock had rusted through. One firm pull and it came away in her hand. She stood there for a moment, took a breath. Then she grabbed the handle and pushed. The door swung open with a groan that carried all the way across the empty field. The inside of the silo smelled like old grain and metal and time. There was light coming in from a small vent at the top, enough to see by, barely. Dana's eyes adjusted. She had expected empty, or mostly empty. Maybe some old equipment, a few rusted tools. The kind of thing you clear out over a weekend and haul to the dump. What she saw instead was a silo that was almost completely full. Not with grain, with stuff. Metal shelves bolted to the curved interior walls. Wooden crates stacked in rough columns. Old machinery parts wrapped in burlap. Canvas-covered shapes she couldn't identify. And along the back wall, a separate wooden structure, almost like a shed built inside the silo itself with its own door padlocked. Dana stood there with her mouth open. She heard gravel crunching behind her and turned fast. An old man was crossing the field toward her. 70s, maybe older. Bib overalls. A face like he'd been left out in too many seasons. "That's Walt's place," he said. Not a question. Dana told him she'd bought it. The man introduced himself as Carl Hendricks. He owned the property that backed up to the east side of her parcel. He said he'd watched over the silo since Walt Hagen died 2 years back, out of habit more than anything else. She asked him about Walt. Carl sat down on a crate just outside the door and told her. Walt Hagen had been a bachelor farmer his whole life. Stubborn. Kept to himself. He'd inherited the land from his father, who'd survived the Depression with a deep distrust of banks and a deep belief in holding on to things. That distrust had passed down like a family name. Walt had used this silo as a storage space for decades. Not for grain, he'd stopped farming years ago. Just for things. Things he couldn't bring himself to throw away. When Walt died, he had no children. No will. No heirs that came forward. The county took the property for back taxes. Carl shrugged. Figured it'd sit here forever. Dana went back inside. Carl followed, mostly to watch, he said. He seemed to appreciate that she wasn't nervous about the dark or the smell or the weight of the place. They started working through the first layer. Prying open crates. Pulling tarps. Old farm tools. A hand pump sprayer. 3 rolls of galvanized wire. Rusted cultivator blades. A set of canning tongs. Barbed wire in a coil. A child's sled, wooden, painted red at some point, most of the paint long gone. Things a family collected across 30 or 40 years of working land. Dana set each item outside in the sunlight. Tried to think about what was salvageable. The wire might be worth something. Some of the tools, maybe. Her back was hurting by noon. She sat on a crate and drank from a water bottle and looked at the pile she'd made. Carl handed her half a sandwich he'd brought from his house. She ate it without asking what was in it. They got to the inner wooden structure around 2 in the afternoon. The padlock on it was newer than the one on the main door. It hadn't rusted through. Carl went back to his property and returned with bolt cutters. Took both of them to get through it. Inside the wooden structure, which was maybe 8 feet square, they found shelves. And on the shelves, mason jars. Dozens of them. Sealed with paraffin wax over the lids. Each one labeled in faded pencil on a strip of masking tape. Dana lifted one and held it up to the light coming in from the vent. Seeds. Dry seeds, pale and fine, shifting like sand inside the glass. She looked at the labels. Old handwriting, careful and small. Reads yellow dent, 1947. Turkey red wheat, 1952. Bloody butcher corn, 1939. Dana looked at Carl. Carl looked at the jars. Walt was a seed saver, he said. Real serious about it. Said the old varieties were disappearing and somebody had to hold on to them. Didn't think much of the modern hybrids. He picked up a jar and turned it in his hands. Never knew he had this many. 14 jars. Dana counted them twice. She didn't know what heritage seeds were worth. She didn't know if these were rare or common or somewhere in between. She set them carefully back on the shelves and made a mental note to look it up. By 5 o'clock, the light was going. They'd worked through most of the main interior but hadn't touched the floor. Dana's feet were swollen. Her hands had 2 blisters on the right palm where the crowbar had bitten in. She carried the last crate outside and set it down and stood there looking at the field. The sky had gone orange and pink in the west. The silo threw a long shadow across the grass. The pile of salvaged items didn't look like much. But the seeds might be something. The land was hers. The structure looked sound. Carl poured coffee from a thermos he'd produced from somewhere. They sat on the tailgate of his truck and didn't talk for a while. Dana rubbed the side of her belly where the baby liked to push. You doing all right? Carl asked. I think so, she said. I think it might work out. She didn't know exactly what she meant by that. She just meant something would come from this. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be enough. The field was quiet. The coffee was strong. For the first time in months, Dana felt something close to still. She'd figure out the rest. She always did. She drove home in the dark, the 14 jars of seeds wrapped in an old blanket on the passenger seat. She thought she'd sleep well that night. She was wrong about that, but not for the reason she expected. She couldn't stop thinking about the floor. Kept her up most of that night. Not the seeds. Not the tools or the wire or the wooden structure. The floor. When she'd swept out the last of the debris from the interior, she'd noticed something. A seam in the concrete. Not a crack, a seam. A line running in a near-perfect rectangle, maybe 4 feet by 3 feet, near the center of the silo floor. She'd almost dismissed it as a poor joint. But it nagged at her. She was back at Route 9 by 8 the next morning with a flashlight, a hammer, and a long-handled crowbar. Carl wasn't there yet. She went in alone. She tapped the concrete around the seam with the hammer. The silo floor gave off the solid, flat thud you expect from concrete. But inside that rectangle, hollow, a different sound entirely. Lower, resonant. Dana got the flat end of the crowbar into the seam and leaned into it. The concrete section wasn't thick, maybe 2 inches. It had been poured as a separate panel, flush with the rest but separate. It shifted. She repositioned, leaned harder, came up. Underneath a cavity, maybe 18 inches deep, set into the ground. Lined with old wood to keep moisture out. And inside the cavity a wooden box, roughly 2 feet long, sealed shut with tar around the lid. Dana stared at it. Her heart was going hard. She got the crowbar under the lid. The tar had dried and cracked with age. Took 4 good pulls. Then the lid came free. She shone the flashlight in. The coins were stacked in neat canvas rolls. Some of the canvas had rotted away, and the coins had slipped and layered against each other like a loosened deck of cards. Silver dollars. Half dollars. She could see the detail even in the flashlight beam, the figures, the lettering, the worn faces of Liberty. Dozens of rolls. More than she could count at a glance. She sat down on the concrete floor. Hard. Her back against the curved wall. The box in front of her. Flashlight in her hand. She sat like that for a while. She wasn't sure how long. When Carl arrived and found her, he looked at the open pit and the box and the coins, and he took off his hat and ran his hand over his head. Well, he said. He put his hat back on. Walt always said his father buried his savings. I thought that was just a story. It wasn't a story. The coin shop in Finley was a small place on Main Street called Finley Coins and Collectibles, run by a man named Dennis Hoare. Dana walked in that afternoon with 3 coins in a plastic bag. She didn't bring the whole box. She wasn't sure yet who to trust. Dennis Hoare put on his loupe. He looked at the coins for a long time. Then he looked at Dana over the top of his glasses. "Where did you get these?" She told him. He set the coins down carefully. A 1921 Morgan dollar, a 1936 Walking Liberty half, and a 1924 Peace dollar. Good to very good condition. He looked at the Morgan again. The Morgan alone is worth $40 to $70 depending on the buyer. The Walking Liberty in this grade, somewhere around 30. The Peace dollar, similar. He leaned on the counter. "How many more do you have?" "I don't know yet," she said. "A lot." He came out to Route 9 that same afternoon. He spent 40 minutes in the silo with his loop and a notepad. When he came out, he stood in the tall grass and looked at his notes before he spoke. "Based on what I'm seeing, rough estimate subject to full grading, you're looking at somewhere between $18,000 and $26,000. Maybe more if there are key dates in the rolls I haven't opened." Dana was quiet. "That's a real number," Dennis said. "I want you to know that. I'm not overselling it." "Okay," she said. "You should get a second opinion," he said. "I'd actually recommend it. Take some photos. Send them to a dealer in Columbus. Don't just trust me." She liked him for saying that. If you've stayed with me this far, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one take real time to find and tell, and subscribing costs you nothing. Okay, back to Dana. Here's where things got complicated. Dana had posted 2 photos on a local Facebook group that morning. Nothing detailed, just the pit and a handful of the coins, with a vague caption about what she'd found. She'd done it partly to document the moment, partly because she hadn't fully processed it yet, and sharing something makes it feel real. By the time Dennis left, her phone had 47 notifications. A reporter from the Findlay Courier had messaged her. 2 antique dealers had reached out, and someone who said they were Walt Hagen's second cousin, twice removed, had sent a message that read, "That property was never legally transferred. I have documentation." Dana read that last one 3 times. Then an attorney's name and number appeared in a text from an unknown number. The message said the attorney represented the Hagen estate and wanted to discuss her purchase. Just like that, the coins weren't a private miracle anymore. They were evidence in a story someone else wanted to tell differently. That morning, Dana had sat on a concrete floor thinking she might be okay. By afternoon, she was wondering if she was about to have a fight on her hands. The nature of things had changed. She wasn't just a woman who'd found something. She was a woman holding something that other people wanted. The attorney's name was Craig Bellows, and he represented a man named Timothy Hagen of Akron, Ohio, who claimed to be Walter Hagen's second cousin. Timothy Hagen had not known Walt well. They'd met twice at family events decades earlier, according to what Dana later pieced together. When news of the silo discovery spread, Timothy had made some calls. Dana found her own attorney through a referral from a woman at the diner who'd been through a property dispute. She drove to the office the next morning and laid out the whole thing. The printout from the auction, the confirmation email, the deed that had arrived by mail after the county processed her $12 payment. The attorney was a woman in her 50s named Roberta Parks. She read through everything without saying much. Then she looked up. "The county tax auction sale was legal and final," Roberta said. "Mr. Bellows can send all the letters he wants. The property transferred to you on the date the auction closed. Everything in the silo transferred with it. That's standard property law." Dana asked about the cousin's claim. Roberta shook her head. Timothy Hagen had 2 years to step forward when the county moved to collect back taxes. He didn't. The county followed the proper notification process. His claim is going nowhere. She paused. That doesn't mean he won't try to make noise. Some people make noise. But legally, you're clean. Clean. Dana held on to that word. 3 days after she met with Roberta, something happened that she hadn't expected. She got an email from a woman named Dr. Patricia Ewan, an assistant professor in the Department of Plant and Soil Sciences at Ohio State University. Dr. Ewan had seen the news story in the Courier. Not about the coins. About the seeds. The reporter who contacted Dana had written a short piece that mentioned, in passing, the 14 jars of heritage seeds found alongside the coins. Dr. Ewan had read it over breakfast on a Thursday morning. She wrote, "I don't want to get ahead of myself, but some of the variety names you mentioned are ones we've been looking for. Would you be willing to bring the jars to Columbus?" Dana drove to Columbus on a Friday with the jars wrapped in towels in a laundry basket on the back seat. Dr. Ewan met her in the parking lot of the agricultural building. She was in her late 30s, practical and direct, with the look of someone who spent more time in fields than offices. She lifted one of the jars and held it up and read the label. Then she went quiet for a moment. "Bloody butcher corn, 1939, she said. "That's what it says," Dana told her. Dr. Ewan looked at her. "We haven't had verified seed stock of this variety from before 1945 in any of our collections. It's not extinct, but what you're holding, if it germinates, is a primary source. That's a different category entirely." They spent 2 hours going through every jar. Dr. Ewan photographed each label. She made notes. When they got to a jar labeled Turkey Red Wheat, 1952, she set her pen down. "Dana," she said, "I need to be clear with you. Viability testing will take weeks. But if these seeds are what the labels say they are, and if a meaningful percentage germinate, you have at least 2 varieties here that are not currently in any public seed bank collection in Ohio." Dana asked what that meant in practical terms. Dr. Ewan said the university had a heritage seed preservation fund. It operated on grants. It wasn't a large fund, but they could offer Dana a purchase price for the collection and a small royalty arrangement if the varieties proved viable and entered active cultivation. "How much?" Dana asked. Dr. Ewan said $8,000 for the collection, plus a per-acre royalty if and when the university grew and distributed seed from the verified varieties. She said it plainly. This wasn't the coins. It wasn't retirement money, but it was real and it would keep going. "And the university would grow them?" Dana asked. "Yes, and other growers eventually. These varieties would come back." Dana looked at the jar in Dr. Ewan's hand. Walt Hagen had packed those seeds in wax and glass and darkness, in a silo at the edge of a field, and he'd gone to his grave without telling anyone. Not because he was hiding them, because he didn't think anyone would listen. Dana thought about that for the whole drive home. A week later, Craig Bellows sent a formal cease and desist letter to Roberta Parks. It went nowhere. The county clerk submitted a formal confirmation of the legal transfer. The auction records were airtight. Timothy Hagen's claim dissolved before it was ever formally filed. Dana signed the seed agreement with Ohio State 3 weeks later, in Roberta's office with a notary present. $8,000, wired to her account within 30 days. She sat in her car in the parking lot afterward and called Pam. Pam didn't laugh this time. "Dana," she said quietly, "you bought that thing for $12. "I know." Silence on the line for a moment. "You okay?" Pam asked. "Yeah," Dana said. "I think I actually am." The coins went to auction through Dennis Hoare's referral, a regional numismatics event in Toledo. Final sale, $22,400. She drove home, stopped at Rusty's to pick up her final paycheck. She'd given her notice the week before. She stood in the parking lot and looked at the diner for a minute. Then she got back in her car and drove toward Route 9. By the following May, the silo had a window. It was round, cut into the south-facing wall about 4 feet above the ground, framed in steel and fitted with double-paned glass. When the morning light came through it, it lit up the interior like something planned rather than improvised. Which, in the end, it was. Dana had hired a local contractor named Mike, a man Carl had known for 30 years and vouched for personally, to gut and rebuild the interior. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't as expensive as she'd feared. A concrete floor properly laid, insulation on the interior walls, a small bathroom tucked into the curve, a kitchen counter and a 2-burner stove, and above all of it, accessed by a spiral steel staircase in the center, a sleeping loft with just enough room for a full bed and a crib. For 120 square feet, give or take. It was the right size for 2. Lily was born in January. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, dark hair, a serious expression she wore from the first hour like she was already thinking things over. Dana had been alone at the start of the delivery, but Pam arrived in time to hold her hand for the hardest part. By May, Lily was 4 months old and sleeping well, and spending her mornings looking at the round window from the crib positioned directly beneath it. The light moved across the curved wall as the day went along. Dana watched her watch it. Carl came by most Saturdays with vegetables from his garden. He'd pull up in his truck and sit at Dana's small outdoor table while she made coffee, and he'd hold Lily while Dana stood at the counter, and they'd talk about the field and the weather and whatever else came up. Carl was not a big talker, but he was a consistent one. Dana had come to value consistency more than most things. Pam came on Sundays. She brought food and stayed too long and was exactly the right amount of annoying in the way that only a sister can be. Dana didn't mind. Not anymore. The reporter from the Courier had followed up twice. First after the coin auction. Then again in the spring when the silo conversion was nearly done. She'd run a longer piece, picked up by a regional paper and then a few websites. The headline was something about a $12 investment. Dana didn't read it carefully. She didn't love being a story, but she understood why other people did. The reporter had asked her one question that Dana kept coming back to. "When you bid $12 on that silo?" the reporter asked. "What were you thinking?" Dana had taken a moment with that. Then she said, "I don't know if I was thinking anything. I just had a feeling. And I didn't have the luxury of ignoring my feelings." The reporter wrote that down. Dana thought about it later, lying in the loft with Lily asleep beside her. The luxury of ignoring feelings. That was it, exactly. When you have nothing, you have to listen to yourself. Because there's no margin for error and no safety net, and the only thing you've got that costs nothing is instinct. It hadn't been strategy. It hadn't been vision. It had been a woman, alone, at a kitchen table at midnight, looking at a $12 listing and deciding that something had to change. Deciding it so quietly that she barely heard herself do it. The legal challenge from Timothy Hagen never went anywhere. His attorney stopped returning Roberta's calls after the third letter. Dana hadn't heard his name in months. The seeds were in the ground at a research farm outside Columbus. Dr. Ewan had emailed in April with preliminary viability numbers. The Bloody Butcher corn had germinated at 63%. The Turkey red wheat was even higher. 2 varieties that Walt Hagen had sealed in wax and glass and silence were growing again, coming back up through the soil of a different field in a different decade. Dana thought Walt would have liked knowing that. The first royalty check was small, less than $200. Dana framed the check stub, not because it was impressive, but because it was ongoing. It was a thing that would keep happening. Believe me, that matters more than a one-time number. A thing that keeps happening is different. A thing that keeps happening is a foundation. Gerald, the landlord from Depot Street, had sent a note after the news piece ran. It was friendly in a way that had nowhere to go. Dana wished him no ill. She just didn't live on Depot Street anymore. She stood outside the silo one evening in late May, Lily on her shoulder, facing west. The sun was going down flat across the field. The grass was green. The air smelled like dirt and something blooming nearby. The silo stood behind her, solid and round and strange in hers. 7 months earlier, she'd pushed open that rusted door alone and terrified, and had heard a sound in the dark that stopped her cold. She'd grabbed the frame and steadied herself and listened, and for a moment the whole thing had felt like a threat. Now she knew what that sound had been. A crate shifting on a metal shelf. Old wood settling. The whole mystery had been nothing but an old building adjusting to being opened after years of being closed. That's all it ever was. But what was inside? That was something. That had always been something. It had just been waiting for the right person to spend $12 and find out. She looked out at the field until the light was gone. Then she went back inside and closed the door behind her.